Vladimir Putin, the most powerful man in Russia, a former KGB agent who rose to the highest office in the land and held it for over 2 decades. A leader who restored Russia's pride and influence, but also crushed its democracy and freedom. A man who is revered by millions, but feared by many more. Recep Tayyip Erdoğan, the undisputed leader of Turkey and a major player in the Middle East. A former mayor of Istanbul who became the prime minister and then the president of his country. A leader who transformed Turkey's economy and society, but also eroded its secularism and rule of law. A man who is loved by millions, but hated by many more. How did these men become what they are today? What drives them to cling to power at any cost? And what will happen when they finally leave the stage? This is the story of 2 men who started as leaders but ended as dictators. 2 men who changed the course of history but also paid a heavy price for their power. This is the paradox of the power, how it can make or break a person, a nation, and the world. You see, Vladimir Putin and Recep Tayyip Erdoğan were not born as dictators. They were ordinary citizens who rose to power through their charisma, intelligence, and ambition. Putin was born in 1952 in Leningrad, now St. Petersburg in the Soviet Union. He grew up in a modest family and joined the KGB, the Soviet Secret Service, in 1975. He served as a spy in East Germany until 1990 when he returned to Russia and entered politics. He became the deputy mayor of St. Petersburg in 1994 and moved to Moscow in 1996 to work in the presidential administration. Erdoğan was born in 1954 in Istanbul, Turkey. He grew up in a poor neighborhood and was interested in football and politics from an early age. He studied business administration at Marmara University and joined the Islamic Welfare Party in 1983. He became the mayor of Istanbul in 1994 and gained popularity for his effective management and anti-corruption stance. Both Putin and Erdoğan emerged as leaders at a time when their countries were facing political and economic crisis. Russia was struggling with the aftermath of the collapse of the Soviet Union, which led to chaos, corruption, and poverty. Turkey was suffering from inflation, unemployment, and instability due to military coups and political polarization. Putin became the prime minister of Russia in 1999 after Boris Yeltsin appointed him as his successor. He quickly gained popularity for his decisive actions against terrorism and separatism in Chechnya and for restoring order and stability in Russia. He was elected as the president of Russia in 2000 with 53% of the vote. Erdoğan became the prime minister of Turkey in 2003 after his Justice and Development Party won a landslide victory in the 2002 elections. He was praised for his economic reforms that boosted growth and reduced inflation, and for his diplomatic initiatives that improved Turkey's relations with the European Union and the Middle East. He was re-elected as the Prime Minister of Turkey in 2007 and 2011 with increasing majorities. Both Putin and Erdoğan were seen as strong and visionary leaders who brought hope and prosperity to their countries. They were respected by their people and admired by the world. They seemed to be democratic leaders who cared about their people's welfare. But things were about to change. Now, in the early years of leadership, Putin and Erdoğan showed signs of being pragmatic and progressive leaders who implemented policies that benefited their countries. Putin focused on strengthening Russia's economy, security, and sovereignty. He increased public spending on healthcare, education, pensions, and infrastructure. He encouraged foreign investment and improved fiscal discipline. He increased Russia's military spending and modernized its armed forces. According to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, Russia's military expenditure rose from $19.7 billion in 2000 to $65.1 billion in 2019. An increase of 230%. He also asserted Russia's role as a global power by opposing NATO's expansion into Eastern Europe, supporting allies such as Syria and Iran, and mediating conflicts such as the one between Georgia and South Ossetia. Putin was clearly on a mission. Under his rule, Russia's economy would have a rapid transformation. According to the World Bank, Russia's GDP grew from $259 billion in 2000 to $1.7 trillion in 2013, an average annual growth rate of 6.9%. Its poverty rate declined from 29% in 2000 to 10.8% in 2013. The nation's life expectancy increased from 65.3 years in 2000 to 71.6 years in 2019. Erdoğan, on the other hand, focused on transforming Turkey into a modern and prosperous country with a strong identity and influence. He pursued economic liberalization, privatization, deregulation, and integration with global markets. According to the World Bank, Turkey's GDP grew from $196 billion in 2002 to $754 billion in 2018. An average annual growth rate of 5.4%. Erdoğan approved social services such as healthcare, education, housing, and transportation. He also promoted Turkey's cultural diversity, secular democracy, and human rights. Turkey's poverty rate declined from 27.3% in 2002 to 10.2% in 2016, according to the World Bank. Erdoğan pursued EU membership, normalized relations with neighbors such as Greece and Armenia, and mediated conflicts such as the one between Israel and Palestine. Both Putin and Erdoğan were praised for their achievements and reforms, which improved the living standards and international standing of their countries. They were regarded as successful and popular leaders who had the support and trust of their people. But as you'll later find out, both leaders would face massive criticism, which revealed some of the flaws and limitations of their leadership. Putin was accused of being authoritarian and corrupt by undermining the independence and accountability of the judiciary, the media, the parliament, and the civil society. He was criticized for cracking down on political opponents, journalistic and activists who challenged his authority or exposed his wrongdoings. In fact, Russia ranked 149th out of 180 countries on the Press Freedom Index by Reporters Without Borders in 2020. According to the International Court of Justice, Putin violated several provisions of international law and human rights treaties through Russia's actions in Crimea, eastern Ukraine, Transnistria, Abkhazia, South Ossetia, and more. He was accused of using excessive force, annexation of territory, interference with sovereignty, and denial of self-determination. Erdoğan, on the other hand, was accused of being Islamic and divisive by imposing his conservative and religious views on the secular and diverse society. He was criticized for restricting the freedom of expression, assembling, and association of those who disagreed with his policies or values. According to the European Court of Human Rights, Turkey violated several provisions of European Convention on Human Rights and Fundamental Freedoms by its actions in relation to the failed coup attempt in 2016. Even worse, according to Human Rights Watch, Turkey's human rights situation deteriorated significantly under Erdoğan's rule, with widespread violations such as torture, extrajudicial killings, enforced disappearances, arbitrary detentions, and unfair trials. Both Putin and Erdoğan faced growing discontent and opposition from their people, who demanded more democracy, transparency, accountability, and respect for their rights. They also faced increasing pressure and isolation from the international community, which condemned their actions and imposed sanctions on their countries. But instead of listening to their people in the world, they ignored them. They became more defiant and more determined to hold on to power. But what happened next would shock the world. The two leaders would begin consolidating their power. Now, in order to consolidate their power, Putin and Erdoğan used some dark and sinister strategies to reshape the political landscapes and institutions in the respective countries. Putin changed the Constitution in 2008 to extend his presidential term from 4 to 6 years. He also created a new position of prime minister for himself in 2008 through 2012, when he could not run for president due to term limits. He then returned to the presidency in 2012 after Dmitry Medvedev stepped down as president and became prime minister. Putin also changed the constitution again in 2020 to allow him to run for 2 more terms as president until 2036. Erdoğan was not left out. He changed the constitution in 2017 to transform Turkey's parliamentary system into a presidential one. He also abolished the position of prime minister and transferred all executive powers to himself as president. He then won the presidential election in 2018 with 52% of the vote after forming an alliance with the nationalist MHP party. Erdoğan also extended his presidential term from 5 to 7 years with the possibility of running for a second term. Both Putin and Erdoğan control the ruling parties, the parliaments, the judiciaries, the militaries, and the electoral commissions. They also repressed any opposition parties that posed a threat to their rule. But here's what's truly terrifying. The two leaders also reshaped the media landscape in their favor. They bought and influenced most of the mainstream media outlets, such as television channels, newspapers, and radio stations. They also censored or blocked any alternative or independent media sources, such as websites, blogs, and social media platforms. They use propaganda, disinformation, and manipulation to shape public opinion and to discredit or demonize their critics or opponents. With such power and massive control, these two leaders would shape entire narratives. As they consolidated their power, Putin and Erdoğan would become even more authoritarian and oppressive. They suppressed dissent by using some dark methods to silence or intimidate anyone who dared to challenge or criticize them. They used extra legal means to arrest, exile, and assassinate their opponents. They used threats, harassment, and blackmail to manipulate and silence their critics. They used infiltration and espionage to monitor and sabotage their adversaries. Even as they became more oppressive, Putin and Erdoğan also developed cults of personality around themselves. They personalized power and portrayed themselves as indispensable and infallible leaders who deserved the loyalty and admiration of their people. They presented themselves as the only people who could solve the problems facing their countries and who could fulfill the aspirations of the people. But here's what's truly disturbing. The two leaders portrayed themselves as indispensable and infallible leaders by promoting positive and heroic images of themselves. They used media, culture, and religion to glorify their achievements and virtues and to justify their unfair actions. You see, Putin and Erdoğan also inflicted a human cost on their people and the world. They caused human rights abuses and sufferings under their rule, which affected the lives of millions of people. They caused human rights abuses by violating the basic rights and freedoms of their people. They imprisoned or killed thousands of people who dared to speak out or resist their rule. They tortured or mistreated thousands of detainees or prisoners who were held without trial or due process. They discriminated or persecuted millions of ethnic minorities, religious minorities, women, LGBT group, and refugees who did not conform to their rule. Even more troubling, the two leaders would cause suffering by worsening social and economic problems in their countries. They increased poverty, inequality, corruption, unemployment, inflation, and debt in their societies. In fact, Russia ranked 137th out of 180 countries on the Corruption Perceptions Index by Transparency International in 2020. But here's what's truly disturbing. According to the IMF, Russia's public debt increased from 13.4% of its GDP in 2013 to 18.9% in 2020, while Turkey's public debt increased from 36.2% of its GDP in 2013 to 40.1% in 2020. These two leaders escalated wars in the region and the world. The Uppsala Conflict Data Program revealed that Russia was involved in 6 armed conflicts in 2020, 4 of which involved other states, such as the ones in Syria, Libya, Nagorno-Karabakh, and Ukraine. On the other hand, Turkey was involved in 5 armed conflicts in 2020, 3 of which involved other states, such as the ones in Syria, Libya, and Iraq. Putin and Erdoğan were accused of causing acute sufferings by disregarding the dignity and well-being of their people. But the downfall of Putin and Erdoğan was inevitable, and the end was near. They had pushed their luck too far. They had made too many enemies. They faced a backlash from their people, who rose up against their tyranny and demanded change. They faced a revolt from their allies, who turned against their treachery and plotted to overthrow them. In Turkey, a group of soldiers tried to topple Erdoğan in 2016, claiming that he had become a dictator who had violated Turkey's constitution and secular principles. But Erdoğan rallied his supporters and loyal forces to resist the coup. He blamed U.S.-based cleric Fethullah Gulen for masterminding the coup, which Gulen denied. Erdoğan used the coup as an excuse to purge tens of thousands of people who were accused of links to Gulen or opposition groups. In Russia, a network of mercenaries, oligarchs, and dissidents funded by Prigozhin, a former chef and close associate of Putin, plotted to kill Putin in 2023. Prigozhin, who is also known as Putin's chef or the king of the trolls for his shady businesses and operations, such as catering for the Kremlin, running a troll factory, and sponsoring private armies. They claimed that Putin had become a tyrant who had destroyed democracy and human rights in Russia. But Putin survived the plot thanks to his security forces who foiled it. He blamed Prigozhin for orchestrating it, which Prigozhin denied. Putin used the plot as an excuse to crack down on dissenters and critics. But here's what's completely devastating. Both Putin and Erdoğan face sanctions and international isolation for their violations. The U.S. imposed sanctions on Russia for its invasion of Ukraine in 2022, which caused thousands of deaths and millions of displacements. The sanctions targeted Russia's oil sector and banking system, making it harder for Russia to access global markets and finance. The U.S. also imposed sanctions on Turkey for purchasing Russian S-400 missile systems in 2019, violating NATO security standards. The sanctions banned Turkey from receiving U.S. military equipment or technology, such as F-35 fighter jets or F-16 upgrades. The EU imposed sanctions on Russia for its annexation of Crimea in 2014 and its interference in other countries' affairs. The sanctions restricted Russia's access to EU markets, capital, and technology. The EU also banned Russian state-owned media outlets and individuals from operating in the bloc, accusing them of spreading propaganda and disinformation. The EU also imposed sanctions on Turkey for its drilling activities in the eastern Mediterranean in 2020, violating Greece and Cyprus's rights. The sanctions imposed travel bans and asset freezes on Turkish officials and entities involved in the drilling. The EU also suspended talks on Turkey's accession to the bloc, citing its lack of respect for democracy and human rights. Both Putin and Erdoğan tried to resist the pressure from the world by seeking alternative partners and allies, but they could not escape the consequences of their isolation and alienation from the West. Their economies suffered from the loss of trade, investment, and tourism. The society suffered from a lack of freedom and opportunity. The aftermath of Putin and Erdoğan's rule truly revealed the limits and cost of their power. They failed to achieve their grand ambitions of restoring their country's glory and influence. They failed to secure their country's stability and prosperity. They failed to win the hearts and minds of their people and the world. The truth is that leaders lose reality when they stop listening to others and think they know everything. They become arrogant and overconfident and lose sight of their original goals and principles. They also lose reality when they get addicted to power, money, and fame and forget their true purpose. They become greedy and corrupt and abuse their authority and resources for personal gain. They exploit or oppress others for their benefit. They also lose reality when they live in a bubble and ignore the real problems and needs of their people. They create their own version of reality based on their biases and preferences and force others to accept it. They also lose reality when they destroy democracy and accountability and think they are above the law. They become authoritarian and oppressive and violate the rule of law and human rights. They silence or eliminate any opposition or dissent. They can prevent such transformations by encouraging leaders to be humble, honest, and open to feedback and change. We can help them question their motives, values, and actions and learn from the criticism and advice of others. We can also hold them accountable for their performance and impact and make them open to change and improvement. We can also prevent such transformations by motivating leaders to serve a greater cause, not their own ego. We can help them find inner satisfaction and fulfillment in serving others rather than relying on external gratification. Do you think these two heads of state have had a successful leadership, or have they failed terribly? Please let us know in the comment section. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you guys in the next video.